Challenges of inmates with schizophrenia. One of the first big challenges is misunderstanding of symptoms by law enforcement. A lot of times, law enforcement will look at people on the streets or people committing crimes who have schizophrenia, but be unaware that they actually do have schizophrenia. This can really cause a lot of tension and a lot of elevated responses from law enforcement to people with schizophrenia. This also happens in prisons when correctional officers are unsure of what's going on and don't understand all the symptoms and end up actually doing something that will make the symptoms worse. That also covers inappropriate responses during encounters with police. Like I said, there's been a lot of deadly shootings when it comes to people with mental health being met on the streets by police, and a lot of fear and misunderstanding. Difficulty navigating legal proceedings. I do not have schizophrenia, and it already takes me 20 minutes to even start to think about a legal proceeding in a courtroom. I could let alone imagine not being able to really control my thoughts or emotions and having to navigate legal proceedings. Also, a lot of people with schizophrenia don't have a lot of money or resources, and you also suffer from substance abuse and homelessness, therefore making it even harder for them to have proper lawyers to truly help them. Limited access to mental health treatment in correctional facilities. There is very few psychiatrists and proper treatment and proper people that can provide the proper treatment in correctional facilities. It's one of the biggest downfalls of our current correctional facilities right now. There's also an increased risk of victimization and violence. Inmates with schizophrenia tend to get beat up a lot in prisons, as there's a lot of people who also don't understand them, inmates and correctional officers. Recidivism is another really big problem when it comes to inmates with schizophrenia. Recidivism being ending up back in jail over and over and over again. Recycling back to the article, Association Between Incarceration and Psychotic Experiences in a General Population Sample, the authors state, incarcerated individuals with schizophrenia reportedly have substantially increased risks of multiple incarcerations. This could be because they end up back on the streets and they have no access to the mental health care they were either receiving in prison and the treatments they were receiving in prisons, as well as often medication. Therefore, their mental health redeclines and they end up back in a violent situation. The cycle will then repeat and repeat and repeat. Issues involving treatment in the criminal justice system. Lack of personnel. There are far too few people that are qualified to treat people with different mental health disorders in the prison system working. There is also often such a high rate of people with mental health issues in prisons that there is simply not enough people to help everyone. Lack of resources inside and outside of prisons. Mental health facilities are not easy to find. This also goes along with lack of beds, but mental health facilities are not easy to find nor get into outside of prison. They're often rather expensive, and people dealing with these mental health crises might not be able to afford the treatment that they need. Inside prisons, like I said, there's not enough people and there's not enough money for there to hire a lot of people or extend the prison psych facilities to accommodate everyone. A lack of education and a lack of understanding might actually be the most important part in all of the issues involving treatment. Lack of education, so many of our law enforcement officers, old and new, are unaware and don't have the proper resources to properly understand what someone with schizophrenia might be experiencing. Being better educated in what we can do to help those with schizophrenia and being able to understand what their symptoms need and what these inmates need could truly help us up our treatment of these offenders in the criminal justice system. Issues involving law enforcement and schizophrenia. Poor citizen-officer interaction, as we've said before. It is so often that so many people suffering from schizophrenia are mistreated by officers simply because the officers do not know. A lack of training is also to do with this. There is far too little training done to properly prepare officers to deal with those with mental health problems, especially when they're having a mental health crisis. This also can lead into stigma and personal bias. A lot of people don't necessarily understand what schizophrenia is and have a very sad view of what it truly is. A lot of people think people with schizophrenia are crazy or should be put in a psych ward. There's also personal bias, which doesn't help anything. Say you've had a bad experience with someone who's schizophrenia, you will automatically have a personal bias. And this is something that is not okay to have in law enforcement, since so many inmates are affected by mental health. Fear and misunderstanding is also something that I think really does affect law enforcement officers. The fear of not knowing what to do or how to act in a situation can often also help to raise the tensions that happen between police and citizen interactions, especially when dealing with mental health. Solutions. One of the biggest solutions that I can personally think of is just proper education. Proper education can truly help people understand what schizophrenia is and what people who are suffering from schizophrenia need, especially in prisons. There was a situation where a man was having a psychotic break due to schizophrenia. He was ended up putting in solitary confinement, which actually made his symptoms 10 times worse. So being able to educate officers and law enforcement workers about the proper steps on what to do when someone's experiencing schizophrenia symptoms could truly help everyone involved. Breaking the stigma is also another big and important thing I think that needs to be talked about. The stigma surrounding schizophrenia is so intense that people often just automatically throw them aside. Being able to break the stigma and seeing schizophrenia for what it really is, that being a mental illness, can truly help us and everyone around us understand schizophrenia better, be more willing to work with schizophrenic people, and treat schizophrenic people with more respect. Third-party interventions is also a very important part of this, and I think it could be a very critical solution in stopping this problem of poor police and citizen interaction. There's something in New Mexico called the ACS, which has been we talked about in class. This program is meant to send people with proper mental health training to scenes where there is a police and citizen interaction occurring, and they are there to help the police officer through the situation and the potential offender through the situation. This really does help calm down since these people are properly trained. However, more resources need to be added, especially with programs like the ACS. There needs to be a lot of people to be able to do that, since the chances of having a schizophrenic police officer run-in are very high. More resources could also mean just more money to go to training, more time spent to training, allocating people and medical professionals where they necessarily need to be. Also adding more beds into prisons and psychiatric wards, making psychiatric wards more accessible and affordable, and making sure that once inmates are released, they still have access to medication can greatly help the problem that we are experiencing. Thank you so much for watching and for an awesome semester. I really appreciate it. Here are my sources cited.